Tonight, we're in for a treat. We're doing two edits of some short fiction. So, actually, I think these are sections of. One of them is a section of a collection, and I think this one is a portion of a novel. So, let's jump in. Kind of in general, I start off with these free edits by, in the beginning, looking more at the prose level, kind of how things are sounding on the page, those types of questions. And then as I get into the story, a lot of those line edits I kind of just let fall to the wayside and then focus on maybe more of the larger issues that are appearing even in these short excerpts we're looking at for these quick edits. So yeah, Chapter 3, Fate Awaits. Good morning, Commander Star. The AST Express. So I think it's always good to start with dialogue. It can be a good intro in. You always want to think about how you're leading into a chapter or leading into a section. So yeah, dialogue's a fine way to do that. AST Empress AI ally greets the ship's commander as he awoke from his slumber. The AST Empress's AI ally greeted the ship. So that's a really cumbersome first sentence. I almost would break up how you're introducing this or consider it. So I would just say, like maybe something like allies, soft, AI greeted the ship's commander. Can we get as he woke from his slumber, the darkness of space, though, reminded this was not a good morning. Reminded the commander this was in fact not a good morning. To find the message you received the night before in the gloom, the unknown fate. So some of this context I'm missing because I think we're starting in chapter 3. And one thing it's always worth remembering or thinking about is how you're introducing the scene, right? So one thing that's really helpful is to think of it a lot like film. When I start with dialogue, you're starting on a close-up. You're starting on a character talking. In a movie, it would be entering a scene on a close-up. And then we're staying pretty close for a while, right? It's just this person, the AI, talking. The darkness of space. There's some sort of window out into space, and the commander, right? So I haven't really gotten a sense of very much of the scene. That's okay for now. But it's going to make me as the reader really want to start zooming out and seeing the scene as a whole if you start on a close-up like that. When you start with dialogue, you're starting close-up. So as just like in film, eventually you're going to want to pull out into a wide shot, establishing shot, show us where we are, show us what's going on. However, it's okay for now. You can even draw that out to create some tension. But I do have a feeling, I don't know if that's exactly what you're going for. And again, like you can probably, darkness of space, like so this can help, if you want to start on a close-up with less scene context, ignore this, but little hints like this on pointing to where we are and what's going on in the scene can help establish a sense of place. And that's one of the things you trade off, right? When you start in a close-up, when you're really, really zoomed in at the story's beginning, we're not going to have that sense of place. We're not going to have that sense of where we are. Pros and cons to why to do that. Sometimes it can keep the reader leaning forward if it's executed well. And so, yeah, that's up to you to decide what your goals are for this intro and where they go. It brought to mind the message he received the night before and the gloom, the unknown fate. So again, this is telling me, right? Like it brought to mind, this is, telling through summary. Couldn't he just glance over at his message screen and see the the log where he left it? Like, why doesn't he roll over in bed, look at his message log or whatever technology he has, and he still sees the message? Good morning, ally. So again, he knew his place to make conversation in the shower, has 30 minutes of preferred temperature, stored in the tank. So is it an AI? Because it doesn't sound super intelligent. If it's not, maybe it's like the computer. So like, because the AI makes me think of something conscious. So be really thoughtful about, especially in sci-fi where we don't know what kind of world we're in. I think using certain nouns in a sci-fi setting will operate as shorthand for the reader, right? Like when you say AI, I'm thinking something that's conscious, something that's sentient, something that's going to be making its own decisions. The fact that this is on just a subroutine and it's being monotonous is pushing me in the opposite direction. So we might want to pick a different noun because that definitely comes with genre connotations and some of those um, just some of the baggage that will come with that, where I'm thinking in a certain direction, I'm thinking of uh, a certain set of criteria. Um, okay. His plan is trying to make conversation. Your shower has 30 minutes of preferred temperature water prepared and stored in the tank. So again, so then why is he making conversation? So why does he say good morning? Yeah. So again, some of his responses, I want to see. So like good morning. So if I just read the dialogue, I would think this is a very standard scene. All the all the emotion is getting communicated through the summary, right? So none of like what he's feeling is coming through in what he's saying or what's happening or you know, it's mostly just, and then even in his actions, like and so this is why I encourage a lot of writers, young learning writers, to do the highlighting method, right? Because there's a number of different mechanics that are happening in a given page of prose, dialogue, action description, like something someone's doing, summary, like uh, taking a lot of facts and distilling them into like a few quick statements. Um, those types of things. Um, so when you're establishing a scene, especially at the very beginning of your narrative, it's really, really important to think about which of those things are communicating the emotion and where you're trying to start. And ideally, all of them should. Right? So, like, in terms of we have his emotion of despair and sadness coming through here, right, in summary, but it's not necessarily coming through dialogue, right? We don't have, his emotions aren't communicating. His dialogue, yeah, like why doesn't he say something like "shut up, ally" or whatever to this computer subroutine? And likewise, when he's showering, he's describing the pleasant carpet and tickling his feet. So like, and also the scene description, right? So like these are. This also doesn't reflect the depressive, you know, it's not a good morning summary and thoughts we saw earlier. So, I mean, maybe he's doing these things mechanically without really looking, but then because he's our viewpoint character, he wouldn't really notice the pleasant carpet, and those types of things. So, like, that's like a pot, like, the details of the scene that the character notices can also imply the emotional state, right? Um, so something like the pleasant carpet uh, kind of points towards a different emotional state. This detail of scene. Yeah, so like pleasant carpet, yeah, like what you observe. And I mean, think of it just like life. When you're sad or when you're having a bad day, you're not smelling the roses. Sometimes that's one of the ways you cure a bad day is you just look up at the sky or at the world around you and you get out of your head. And so the fact that this person's touching the soft carpet, having this kind of more tactile, pleasant, even just to the adjectives. I mean, if it was annoying or uncomfortable, that would be probably okay. But again, we establish an emotion by telling us that hey, this person is depressed. They don't think it's a good morning, or they had a really worrisome message. But then many of the other systems that are in place in the scene are working, not necessarily working against it, but they're just giving me a different impression. And I'll start going faster. I know that we start slow in the beginning. To the outside observer, the floor of the ship seems to always be the same material. The crew are given a type of shoe that meshed with special material, and stepping in the bathroom became a sterile white tile to match the rest of the bathroom's feeling. The outside observer, the floor of the ship seemed to always be the same material, though the crew are given a type of shoe that meshed with the special material and represented the desired material. So the person steps, you can see what they're stepping on for a slight moment, just as they put their foot down. Interesting. I mean, this is an interesting detail. It tells me we're in the far future, but we spend a lot of time on this where I kind of am wanting to get to like, hey, what's going on? Um, and I think this detail can come in later, but odd courage giving more context on the core, you know, tension first. Okay, the water against the shower wall. Centuries out of darkness, Ali's voice faded as the rhythm of water took over his mind. An abnormal ding brought him out of his trance. Commander, said Ali, one last thing. A message came for you whilst you were sleeping from Her Majesty, the Empress of the Holy Terran Throne. Let's go, it's Earth! So again, sometimes using certain nouns and certain phrasing can save you some time, right? Because I know generally in the sci-fi universe that Terran, Terrace, Terra is going to generally refer to Earth. So this tells me that this is like the Empress of Earth. This helpful shorthand. I'm, using my sci-fi reader knowledge to assume this means Earth. Maybe I'm wrong, totally valid, but at least that's where some of the shorthand language is going to lead me, right? The perplexed century as he stepped in. This perplexed blah 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 perplexed century as he stepped into the tower. Play the message. What's still in here? Intended to say more, and as well still in had other plans. A little bit of a funky construction. So yeah, a bit of a funky, bit of a yeah, I'll just say revise. Yes, Commander. Sentry Star, the Emperor's voice carried away to it. Not much, not enough to make it an unpleasant sound, however, enough to tell Sentry that something wasn't right. As per Section 13 of the Galactic Treaty signed by the Terran Empire, the Harium Empire, as well as the other one other sentient society. Why wouldn't she mention the third? Yeah, why would she not? I mean, that's a little bit like so. Again, that shifts into a different register of language, right? So you do a good job starting with a very formal register of language. Like it's very formal. This is very formal. Um, so yeah, so then now it feels like this person has committed genocide. This abusive coward would not be able to look to be up for the Council of 20 where your fate will be decided. The Emperor's voice seemed on the edge of breaking. Your routine will continue as normal, however, as you exit your quarters, you'll be accosted by guards. Please do not resist. I am sorry, my love. Glassing. She was right. He had committed the atrocity many times, but it was legal then. I do like this break. Oops. I do like this, lapse in her formal tone, but consider, removing the previous one so this, change in register feels significant, feels more significant. Glassing. So this is making me not root for this character. He's committed genocide. Yeah, yeah. So again, so I hate this character, and even though he's like, oh, I'm having a bad day because I got a message, like that falls away because I'm like, well, this person deserves a bad day. He's been a genocidal maniac, or even though he's been doing it for his work, you kind of want someone who's been, even if his job is telling him to commit genocide, to be like, you know what, maybe the paycheck isn't worth it. Maybe I'm not in for this. So again, really losing my um, what's the right word? My likability of this character. Destroying infrastructure, cities, bunkers, everything. So I kind of gathered that you found a really good noun, right? The commander had seen the entire solar system scope in flames, and he would see Terran colonization of these systems. So then why did he still do it? He's afraid of eternal punishment. That seems like all the more reason to disobey. Yeah, this makes me like him even less. So it's like, so if he has like a moral compass that has like a religious backing, where he is, worried about some sort of eternal punishment or some sort of thing like that, like he's judged by the Almighty and not by men, then that would almost indicate that that would give him more reason to not do it, and so it's even more surprising that he did it. It makes him even more um, more more like scummy that he would do that. End of message. Would you like me to save the message? Yes, please, Ally. Thank you. Sentry bowed his head and stepped out of the shower. Went through his routine as normal. Brushed his teeth. Oh, coach, she'd poured her soul into it, and Sentry had worn it with pride. So again, this is cool world building, but it is distracting a little bit. This is cool world building, but it's coming too early. We have a, active thread in this scene, and it's sometimes better to wait for a lull to give a background. Sentry walked into the dining area from his wardrobe and sat down at the table with food served him by the drone was satisfactory. Turning on the access written news, something his father always read it for yourself would say. Even the smallest vocal inflection can change how you feel about something without even knowing it. So, a chuckle doesn't mesh well with the stakes of the scene as I understand them. This person committed genocide, is getting, like imprisoned, and it's shocking that he laughs to himself. This makes him sound, insane. Yes, this is giving me the impression this person's crazy or insane, right? That he's able to kind of muse and laugh about his father's words when he just got the notification he's never going to see his family again. He's going to get put in prison. He's probably going to get, put on death row because he's apparently all those genocides he's actually getting held accountable for now. And he's also not a very good person because he's committing genocide. So there's quite a bit here. News travels fast. Highlight. Senpai Scott says he read the end line. War, criminal, or imperial hero. The council would pin this severe overstepping of treaty arrangements. So again, like the sentience or not sentience of the AI doesn't seem super well established. So initially he's dismissive of the AI, and now he's treating it with more kindness. This feels a little late. This feels opposite to what we initially established. Novelith, hello, hello. Long time no see. We're doing an edit. It's been a minute. So welcome. Welcome to the edit. I haven't done an edit in a long time, and I figured it was just about gosh darn time to do one. Because I miss it. How have you been, BRB? Yeah, no worries. Alright. The AI may have been a machine, but she understood enough. She's not picked up on any of the other cues or commented on the message she's delivered. Why does she understand this? Yeah, so she seems pretty clueless with everything else, and so all of a sudden she's kind of clued into their separation. He opened the door and greeted his fate with a smile. Good morning, men. Morning, sir. One of the men said, since you believe his name was Gerald. Sir, we've been given restraints that can be used to dampen your gifts. However, me and my men I had the letters IMP embroidered thereon. I thought it unnecessary. You know what's happening. We heard you received direct communication. An honor to be sure, even taking into account the circumstances. But had gotten it last night, right? Yeah. This is good. It establishes that he's well respected. This is a good way to show us that he's well respected using dialogue and action. I think some of the dialogue is a little on the nose, like, hey, taking into account the surfaces, but yeah, some of this is a little telling, but yeah, I think this is one of the stronger uses of dialogue to communicate what's going on. I see that this person is really well respected, a kind of a great commander that maybe getting thrown under the bus. He's not really reacting in the way that I would expect. So I'm getting the sense that there's some sort of like mental block that he's able to generate to kind of protect his mind or whatever, but we'll see. Shall we be off then? Takes also leave it. We understand you're unable to divulge details or otherwise. Okay, this is kind of restating. So this is verbal doubling here. This is restating. This restates a little of what I already gathered from the subtext of what was said above. So again, trust your writing. I think that initial intro, that initial dialogue set with these, military police officers worked, right? I had a pretty clear sense that these individuals, they were on his side. They didn't really buy whatever he was getting thrown into the bus for. But then we explicitly state it here, so that feels like we're just verbal doubling. There was a more subtle method of communicating it up here. We're like, hey, the fact that they're not wanting to restrain him through their actions, you're showing me up here, and then we're getting it told to us again here. So I would consider revising or removing this second section where we're kind of restating kind of what you already did a good job of implying before, that these people are kind of on his side. They don't really buy what they're getting sold. A tear fell down the commander chief was released. Watch over him. He's shown no other emotion, but now a tear is a lot. For someone who's shown no emotion outside of his thoughts, tear feels like a large jump. Yeah, I mean, his wife, or who I assume is the Empress, or maybe it's somebody that he's in a relationship with or something. She's saying goodbye. I'm assuming the Empress is his wife. She's saying goodbye. And I'm sorry, my love, and all these things. Doesn't have any emotional response. Says goodbye to his AI, which is kind of a little bit emotional because he's saying goodbye to his computer. It's a little bit sentimental, but the fact that just because these men have his back, that feels like a lot. He only wished now his son thought of these accusations. To know what his son thought of these. He still remained on Terra Prime. The rest of the journey in the quarters of Lovercrower, okay, would bring him to his fate. The lift opened in the hangar bay. This bay was built to hold the smaller cruisers, supporting ships carried by the Empress. Ships were mostly doing supply runs to Terra, other things that were just as important. Supply runs don't strike me in this world, right? Because we're leaning on sci-fi tropes. So in sci-fi tropes that I know, Supply runs don't. Hey, well, welcome back, novelist. Welcome, welcome. Supply runs don't feel important. Don't feel Yeah. So if you're gonna kind of subvert the trope, do something a little bit different. Give a little bit more detail, right? Because tropes can be very efficient. You can lean on like, hey, in a sci-fi world, everyone rolls their eyes when they gotta do supply loads or whatever. Like if it was, the battles are what people always get excited for, right? So if we say, hey, supply runs are really important, for supply runs being delayed, that's true. So yeah, like this far out, like give me that context, like this far out in the galaxy with this many troops, we need a constant supply from the prime core, Terra Prime, to be able to successfully operate, right? The busy work at the port meant the hangar was nearly empty. I've been an Alliance fighter transporter, transports as everyone calls them. I just said hangar. A little bit funky language. This is a bit of a different register of language uh, than I think you intend. Yeah, so the narrator, the third person narrator, the person who's telling us a story from this person's point of view, has generally been pretty casual. So said hanger kind of comes with a different tone, and it also is a different construction than what we've seen. So I would maybe revise that one. The busy work at the apartment, the hangar was nearly empty. Transports, as everyone called them. I mean, I don't think you need this. Like, we kind of know that, if someone calls them a transport, we know, you know, that when someone says transport, they'll probably be talking about this ship. Like, just the fact that it's the only thing with transport in the name, and then we know that just people shorten names like that, you probably don't need that extra clarification. This time Sentry knew I was there. It would be his vessel down on the planet surface where they would face a judgment by council. There's our ride, Officer Gerald said. Who's Officer Gerald? Did we get him named earlier? Was he named? Oh yeah, I believe his name was Gerald. Okay. Um, Indeed, it would appear that way. The pilots are waiting outside the vessel. At ease, men. Yes, sir. They both said in unison as they assumed a more relaxed position. The uniforms on both were designed for the high G travel of space. Though their ranks were still clearly embroidered, warrant officers. So then why did he have to guess Gerald's name if the other people have name tags? If everyone wears tags. Also, if these are minor characters, no need to name them. Naming a character signals to the reader that they're important and need to be remembered. So remember, be really, really thoughtful before you name a character. Naming a character is a signal to the reader this person matters, this person is important. So it often can be better to leave a lot of characters unnamed and only really name your main characters. It's obviously a stylistic choice. It's going to be your call in the end, but That's generally not a bad approach. How are we doing? We're about 6 pages in. 12:18. I do want to make sure I get to the other story. So let me see how long that one is. Quick. 12 pages. Alright. This is in Courier, so it shouldn't be too, more like 8 pages. So I'll get to 8 pages on this, and then I'll jump over. I assume you boys are taking us down. Why, yes, sir, that would be us. Well, good, boys. Let's load up. I'm going to move on. Don't want to keep the council waiting. Then to the council put more energy after you, Commander. The IMP officer stepped aside. Thank you. So a lot of this, like, after you, thank you. Moving dialogue. Like, this is where yeah, so usually like these, like after you, go ahead, these types of things, this is where you actually want to use summary. This is when telling is really helpful. So you generally want, the show don't tell stuff matters when you're really trying to communicate the subtext or the emotion or the stakes or the feel of the scene. So you want to evoke the things that will make it drama, right? So the stuff that's not dramatic, that's when you can tell. Like, so just saying, okay, hey, go ahead and get on the ship. Go ahead after you. Thank you. That stuff you can just see, instead of like even this well done, get a move on, boys. This type of stuff probably not super necessary. So you can just say, I assume you boys are taking this down. Well, actually, that would be Jonathan confirmed. You can just say like bent his head and boarded. And then you can cut. You don't even need my little addition. You can just cut this whole thing. You can just say OBS. And you just cut to as Sentry stepped into the ship, his shoes became a formal dress. Became formal to match his attire. As a special connection made with the surfaces, the readout was lost. Inside of the transport was much more cramped than Sentry liked. Yeah, so again, feel free to use contractions, right? Like, it's okay to go a little bit deeper into that character's thoughts. Like, it wasn't uncomfortable. No, it was just small. So this is good, right? Like, so this is good. It's called free and direct discourse, where you're kind of describing things in a way that would be what that character's thought processes are like. So good use of free and direct discourse. Yeah, it's whole 22. We'll see. I'll get to the bottom of this page here, and then I'll do a quick summary of my thoughts. Yeah, there's quite a bit left to go here. Sentry, though, was lost in thought. He had been worried about this day coming, the day where he'd have to stand before a biased council and defend himself. He wasn't innocent, of course, he wasn't. He should have chosen not to give his brother the order, and yet he didn't. He gave, knowing full when it was wrong and despicable. So then why did he do it? So then if he's doing so I want to get a sense of his reasoning why, right? Like, what was his rationale? What was his rationale for doing it then? Like, what had he told himself? Um, you know, It just makes him feel more evil if there are no excuses. So I think and I'll get to the bottom of this page and maybe read a little bit more, and then I'll kind of write my overall notes here, right? Didn't know full well wrong, or any of the guilt, only that he planted a seed of hate in his brother's mind. Have you been to Terra before? Century heard someone ask. The question wasn't directed, but it was alluring enough for Century to want to listen in. No, I haven't. Have you been there, James? I've been stationed there once. Whoa, what's it like down there? So again, this is a lot of backstory stuff, right? So this feels like world building being forced through dialogue. We probably don't need this info now because we can just get the scene description when S lands. Mm, you know. Yeah, so it's like because this kind of interrupts the dramatic question, right? Because the dramatic question that I have, the thing that I actually am curious about is why did this person who committed, why did he commit genocide? Why is he being so friendly and kind of happy about being in, like, not like happy, but so submissive? He's about to get probably executed for committing genocide, and he's being very kind of nonchalant about it. So those are the things that I'm at least wondering about, and that's where I want more description to be rather than stuff about the world, right? And so it's always tough because when you're in an early draft, which I'm guessing this is probably an early draft, um, you know, you're telling the story to yourself just as much as everybody else. But once you start getting to later drafts, you will probably want to. Oops, I want to make this to normal text, and then I'll do overall. Let's do the good. So what worked? I'm gonna make this a little bit more single space because it's a little easy. Um, all right. I like the motion of the story. The general's last day before court martial. I don't think I spelled that right. Okay. The world building is cool. Well, I think it's good. It's good that the characters know each other. And we can, gather information about who is who by the way people treat each other. So this is actually something you're doing really well. And I want to make sure you kind of realize that because it's not easy to do, and I think it's something that's um, worth thinking about, right? Is to say, okay, how am I communicating who's who and who matters? And the way you're doing it is a really good method, right? Which is to say, hey, I'm going to introduce all these characters know each other, and depending on how they treat each other, that kind of gives me clues as to, oh, is this a nice person or are they not a nice person? Like, we've all been in that social situation where, um, you know, someone walks into the room and people act more stiffly, maybe, and then you're like, oh, are they trying to impress this person or are they mad or something? And that's always good. That has us leaning forward, right? We're like, okay, well, what's going on? So you're good. It's good that you're using that to give us more context. Sorry, I'm having a little snack. Stuff to improve. So yeah, you're in a dramatic scene. There's a lot of stuff happening. stopping to do world building is only going to slow your story down. That's something you generally want to avoid. So my recommendation in that respect would be, save the world, like, only give what's necessary to communicate the scene in the story, and then save everything else. The other stuff is make sure the emotion of the story, reflects in action and dialogue, and even how characters describe the scene. Like he could look wistfully at his ship and say, this is the last time I'm going to see my ship. I'm going to miss those loading docks, whatever. That's a kind of a silly example, but it's a good way to get description across while also communicating emotion. Because now the reader's like, oh, there are loading docks over there. And they're saying, oh, and he's going to be wistful and sad about where he's going. And you've done two things for the price of one. Um, yeah. Yeah, and I'd say like the main character is very unlikable right now. He's committed and doesn't seem to and hasn't given us a good reason why. Yeah, it doesn't seem there's much redeeming about this character just yet. That might change, and it might be a very valid decision to say, hey, you know what? I want him to be unlikable for this section, and then later in the story you'll get to know him. Pros and cons to that, but I mean, just to be aware of that there's going to be some trade-offs there. Okay. Overall, great job. Fun intro. I'll even write it in. Awesome. Yeah, building in sci-fi and kind of doing this stuff is not easy. So well done. You feel really proud of what you put together here. It's great. And I can't wait to see what you continue to do in like future revisions and in future drafts. So, now, we are jumping onto a story called The Coat. It's a little hard to see the top here, but we can jump on in. And I have my notepad here. A little bit. Alright, so I'm going to do page 1. I can't rent this, it's too precious, it's a piece of history, for God's sake. I slumped onto the floor of the shop. The oldest garment I've ever owned, a real treasure. So I like the frame in part. I like the frame's concept, emotional beat of, the owner really loving. Way to do wrap text. There we go. Loving his merchandise. I think that's, really, really cool that, there's this really deep connection to the item because the character in the story cares. I'm going to care, right? And then because the reader is listening to what the character is doing, they're taking cues from the character. So the fact that this character really has this emotional connection to this coat, as like this kind of like prized artifact that they have, it brings us along, right? And we start to feel the same way. The one thing that I'm noticing is the use of a frame here, right? Where we say imagining, and you're kind of like collapsed on the floor and passed out, and I had this imagination, or this imagine of like this coach experience. Um, so in you probably just that's probably just extra. I would just cut. So like I would just cut straight to like the coats because I know you're switching into the coats point of view. So consider just cutting to the coats point of view without having, you know, a, I'm imagining transition. We gather from context, that this is an imagined POV POV for an object. Okay, so I will be a coat. Right now, I'm snug and warm inside my mother's womb. I will be born a beast and slaughtered. That sounds intense, right? Like that. Like that's a pretty dark. That definitely affects the tone, right? The fact that we are seeing an animal's lifespan and an American bison, a rare animal's lifespan, brings on a darker tone, right? Something to be thoughtful about. It depends on your goal for tone. The animal's lifespan gives this work a darker tone and, makes, a heavier feeling to the work, to the intro. Because like the intro, like the close my eyes, imagine it's a very light tone, right? Um, Makes a heavier feeling, than the intro, which felt, you know, more, fun and silly. All right, because I'm imagining my coat. That's kind of like a fun and kind of um, more lighthearted premise. Where when we get to the actual content, it's a little bit darker, right? I'll be cured and tanned and sewn into a coat. I'm a buffalo, great American bison. Feel my mother's contractions, but that's very, very visceral. Wonderful to be born. I lay down a bed of softness. My mother until I stand up and see the world of endless green prairie. The spring in the valley of green. Life-giving grass and valley grow every year. Eventually, I'm a big bull. Riding through the snow. So, like we're zooming through this animal's life in summary. So one of the things I would think about is what's the goal? Like what's the core thing you're trying to communicate about a coat, right? And about this particular coat. The question that I would think about is you kind of you're running the risk of summarizing history, right? And saying, okay, look, we're just outlining everything that's happened in this coat's life from its animal existence to its coat existence to whatever. If it could just tell us its life story start to finish in a linear fashion. And so that will give a lot of context and a lot of information, but will that be as dramatic as thinking about, hey, what are like some of the tense moments? What are some of the big moments, right? Like there's nothing surprising in some ways about, hey, besides the fact that it's a buffalo, which is kind of a rare animal, there's nothing surprising about a mammal's journey from being born to having milk because it's a mammal to eventually having grass because it's a grazing animal, right? So that there's nothing really surprising there. So that's not going to be adding tension, right? And so some of the questions you want to ask is what is going to make someone keep reading? What is going to make them ask questions about my story, ask questions about the events of what I'm depicting here, and want to continue and want to keep going. And so history, or sort of like a historical summary, like this is a little bit, is not going to work towards that, right? It's going to be generally less dramatic unless it's like a really, really interesting history. But even if you read, I just read Abraham Lincoln's biography, the Lincoln biography. And that's structured very narratively, right? Like he's focusing in on how these things affected Lincoln emotionally. And yes, he's sticking to chronology, the writer, but there's also quite a bit of stuff that's skipped over that's implied, right? Like when we're getting Lincoln's biography, we get some details about his birth, but only the things that are surprising. We're like, yes, like, Lincoln probably had his mother's milk, but that's not in his biography, right? Because that's assumed. That's something that generally everyone is going to have as a kid, unless like it's like formula or whatever. But it's not like a detail that's going to change the course of someone's life, at least unless you're like one of those people who's really focused on the difference between formula and those types of things. Um, so I would really consider page 2. What dramatic, for every detail given, ask what is this dramatically adding to the story, and is this a surprise? The moment I know the speaker of the story is a buffalo describing its behavior doesn't add too much, since it's what I'd expect from any mammal. Let's do this. Okay. Eventually, I'm a big bull. We're running through the snow. The whole herd is moving. It is winter. My fur is thick to keep it the cold. I see the puffing machine running along beside us. It moves like we do at the same speed. If we're part of the herd, I see the white puff of smoke from the rifle and feel a bullet go deep in my chest. My legs buckle, my lungs explode as I crash to the ground. I'm dying as the wagon pulls up next to me. I feel a spike driven in my forehead and the cut's made to my leg. Hooks are inserted. Within minutes, horses are attached to the hooks and flesh my hide in one piece. Is that really how they skin these things? That's pretty gruesome. But it says skinning's not a clean process. Um, so is it still the You see the white puff of smoke from the rifle and feel the bullet go dimensions. So there's not much. So like this is pretty like a cut and dry. Like we're not getting the creature's opinions on what's happening to them, right? Pretty cut and dry. Like everything is very historical, very reported. So again, there's gonna be pros and cons to that approach. I think there's probably more cons than pros because is he happy that he's been slaughtered? He's just kind of reporting his history with no emotion. Like, does he care? Is he not sad? Is he grieving? Like oh, I'm not gonna be able to see my family. Like those types of things. Or her. I think it was a bull, so it's a guy. Um, but page 2, we don't get much interiority or of the creature of the bull. Are they sad, happy, surprised when they're killed? I think we're sticking too close to the facts. Yeah, I think we're sticking just a little bit too close to the facts. I think we want to zoom out, get a little bit more of a holistic view. Then there'll be a few of us left. So yeah, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I'm assuming just because of like scarcity, it's a sad thing. But yeah, how does this character feel about it, right? Because you're describing in such a zoomed out, and you're from this character's point of view, but we're so zoomed out. He's just talking fact. but I want to get some opinion. I want to get some of what they think about this. I can. There's a slight implication that his herd being wiped out is going to be a bad thing, a sad thing, which I can agree with. But is he grieving how little time they have left in the plains? As a buffalo, is he grieving? What exactly bothers this character about that? Um, More specifics on, why the is so troubling. The, loss of time, the loss of family, future. What about the dwindling herd is so sad for this buffalo? My tongue is worth 25 cents. My skin is $4 because I'm a large hide. It's a winter. My intact pelt is massive, measuring over 7 feet and 6 feet wide. So, to some degree, I don't know how much of this is historical. Like, did you do the research to say, okay, this was worth this much at this time, or is this researched? Is this if researched, consider what facts are valuable to the drama and what could be cut. This is a story and not, history. Exactly. So some of the factual might need to be trimmed. Yeah, so you have a lot of factual information here. Whether or not it's historically accurate, it could be. I don't know. Is it necessary is the question you want to keep asking. And what's your goal, right? What is your goal for this story? Is it to just kind of report a history of the coat from its point of view? That's a valid goal. If you want it to be dramatically compelling and to have someone leaning forward when they're reading, you might need to rework some of that or even adjust some of your goals to say, hey, this is going to be more of a story than a history. Is there drama in this creature's kind of journey? Those types of questions are going to be really, really critical to ask. Several days additional scraping, salting, and drying. When it's done, I'm folded and bundled and stored in a cool room. Now being measured, man exclaims that I'll be an extra large coat. He says that I could also be a blanket or a buggy robe. Buggy robe. Guessing I have something to go over a buggy. Lays cotton fabric and call the lining down on me and trims the edges of my fur, so now I match the lining. Then we're joined together with large pins and maybe they sew the lining. So again, none of this is surprising, right? And that's the thing with even if you're writing a history, what is going to get Joe Blow or Mary Sue off the street to be interested in it? You're interested because you have a personal connection to this item, right? And you even in the frame kind of hint at that, where you say, hey, you know what? This item has a strong personal connection to the character, to the speaker of the story. But we don't. To us, it's like, oh, it's kind of a valuable artifact. But what is interesting about it? What is unique about it? Even if you're reporting history, I want it to be surprising history in some ways. Like I could guess that, hey, a lot of this stuff happened. That fur was turned into a, that yes, in order to sew it into a coat, it had to get trimmed, it had to get furred. But we're 4 pages in. The coat does not exist yet, right? Like so, we're still in the transition from animal to coat. Like what about a scene? Like so things to think about is what about a scene where someone like the coat is observing someone trying to purchase it or rent it for, because I know you mentioned it was a rental, in kind of your summary of the story. So what if we get a moment of like the coat realizing it's getting rented, and how does that make it feel, like knowing its history, knowing how valuable of an artifact it is, that it's going into the hands of someone who might be careless with it. Those are interesting potentials, right? Like you can go in any direction. I do think that you probably do need some pretty focused revision in some ways, because if this is a history of the coat, just like a lot of the histories that we've all read, what are the surprising things? Like the history, it's not surprising that the coat was made by a tailor. And it's not surprising that the tailor used an awl and strings and things to make a coat. Like this is probably something you want to summarize pretty quickly. If you do really want to report all this, but then find those facts, if you are doing more historical research, find those facts that are really fascinating, right? And that really bring us into this world. Hey, you know, like Dodge City, like when the wagon pulls into Dodge City and the tannery, and you know that's kind of a cool world, right? Like there's westerns for a reason because the West is interesting. Um, but I kind of want to see some color there and actually to see, okay, well, if we're going to be in this cool world, maybe that's a place where we can get the surprising moments of history. Um, the history aspect isn't compelling enough for me yet, since it's reporting history I could have guessed had happened. Consider, only reporting surprising aspects of the coat's history. Now, not that it was sewn, since I could have assumed that, but maybe it was, worn by a powerful, you know, actor or chieftain or something. you know, like what are the cool things? Like what is going to make me care about this artifact just as much as you do, as the writer, right? Wisdom of the body and moans. Whispers, where's the rest of me? Whispers are my body and bones rotted in the countless plenty of lead slug in my lung. Maybe my cousins, the coyotes or wolves, had a meal of me. Perhaps the Native American sweet sad song is about. That's a. This is one of the better paragraphs, right? Because we're getting into its thoughts. Um, so the paragraph about P4, the paragraph about the coat's body is one of the strongest. It has opinions. Sadness. It's a sweet, sad song. It has speculation and not history, and some drama. Wolves. So I think this is one of the stronger paragraphs you have, and I would lean into that. I would really look at developing that and saying, okay, how can I take the portions of this paragraph that are really working and spread it across my writing and saying, hey, what are the tools and devices I'm using in this paragraph that make it one of the most effective ones I've read so far, at least for me? Some metaphorical language, um, you know, um, some reference to like the world that this creature knew. Like you know, it's referencing a song that it must have heard. Um, talking about the world it lived in that is surprising. A song it heard. Those types of things I think are what can really draw me into this story and make it something that's interesting, right? And there's a lot of stories written from the point of view of objects. And so there is a lot of precedent into how this works. Like some of them are crass. Like the one that I can think of is written from the point of view of like a condom. And so, and it's very modern literary to do stuff like that. So I don't necessarily think I would recommend it, but look for stories like this, like because it's a common trope, it's a common device, and there are conventions. There are things that people have used to make these stories really effective and to make object point of view stories really work. So do the research. Go read a couple of these stories and to see what works. And if you if you're okay with, it's not super crass, but if you're okay with like some kind of more mature content, it's not like inappropriate or anything, but it's just kind of you know like PG-13, I would say. Um, totally transformed my hide will be an outer covering of a human being. I'm still me, but I'm different. I'm called a buffalo coat. And I stay in a cold warehouse, curing for more than 10 days. It's waiting time as I adjust to my new form. Then I'm wrapped in pure white cloth. Buffalo coat, extra large, extra fine grade. You're stacked high to the ceiling. The boxes. So again, a lot of this stuff, the wagon rides to the store. I see my cousins. The horse, yes. I like that he refers to the horse as his cousins. I will note that because I think that's a fun detail here. Um, to the horses as his cousins, gives us more of this object's voice. But again, I'm not seeing anything that's surprising me. That's saying, oh, like, what's really making this engaging and special? Including Coats and Beaver Child has to be as my brother. Is it though? Okay, so then this like kind of brother cousin thing is getting, though referring to the beaver as brother feels a bit confusing. Oversills ivory tipped swagger sticks with gold braid and shiny black lacquer. Okay, showing my shiny black wool. I'll make a nice display from the front window. Quality clothing for a fine dressed gentleman from the West. A few days later, a husky man named Henry comes into the store. It is winter. He has to see the items in the window. So again, none of this stuff is really surprising. Like, okay, it's sort of like, what is this trying to express to me? Is the question that I'm going to be asking, right? It's like, what am I trying to get out of this? What is it trying to express to me? What am I trying to really gather and to internalize from this? And so there's not much beyond what I could have guessed. If you said, hey, this is a story about a coat's life, if I was like, well, it probably was an animal before. That animal might have been, probably was a mammal. It probably got killed. And so, like, all the probablys line up. And so the thing that makes a story is the improbable, the rare, the uncertain. I think there's a lot of probablys, and I want to see some improbablys in this story. Um, everything, most of the events of the story are probable, given, and something I'd assume, given the, frame. But remember, this is a story. Give me the rare, the exciting, the improbable. And that can be quite enthralling if done well. Even if it's in this historical style. So like I don't want to push you away from your vision because I think your vision is the priority. So evaluate what your goals are. If this is achieving your goals, then hey, you know what? That's great. One of the things that it'll probably be harder to get a story like this published just because something that doesn't have a more direct narrative and something that doesn't have more of those kind of the spine of a narrative arc will be a little bit tougher to sell. You might find a place that will do it, but it's just going to be a tougher sell. Oh, the longer the pocket is the game pocket. That's a plus. Close the buttons and I feel him inside. When I feel the outside of him, we are one. It is as if Henry is my muscle and bone. He tries. So, he got his feet caught in a steel trap. Now he's on some man's head. So again, well, even what the beaver's saying is very stereotypical, right? Like the trap, they got trapped in Colorado. Um, so what if there was a different story? What if the beaver is like sad or like confused or maybe not as conscious and sentient as the coat as the coat is like. So just push yourself for some more possibilities. I think we're 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 in a very narrow possibility set. And I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with the story, and there's a lot of ways that these stories work really well. Stories about inanimate objects as the point of view character. I have more that come to mind, but unfortunately, the most recent one I read was this one in the New Yorker. So, I mean, they got in the New Yorker, so apparently, even though it's kind of a silly premise, it was effective. And close the buttons, okay. Think Brother Beaver, East Henry, take them both from the swagger stick as well. He puts the paper and he wears them as he hunts. He shoots small game like rabbits and puts them in his pocket. The weather turns warmer. I get wrapped in the white cloth. Snow comes chasing again. Mainly we hunt together. Sometimes we travel. Eats these animals, but says no prayers or sings no songs upon their death. So again, like these comments are the ones that really ring in an interesting way. So like, I'll just do this as page 7, right? So like, this is an interesting line. Is an interesting line because it shows us some of emotional life of the coat and its feelings of loss. No songs now. Consider leaning into this style more and pruning some of the straight history narration. Okay. Oops. All right. A few times the great festival gathering. Okay. Chuck my first. A few times when there's a great festival, he wears me and my brother a top hat. The ball he gives us to a lady who hangs me up again with other coats and hats. Strange gathering indeed. He instructs the lady to take good care of me. His coat. As Henry becomes old, he hunts less and less. I stay in the cedar chest. Brother Beaver Swagger are there still and keep me company. A long time passes. Go on a train ride. We go south to Chicago. I've not worn for the longest time. It's dark and lonely. One day, a young man comes and takes a cedar chest from the attic where I looked at and admired. Young man, Dorothy's nephew, puts me on. Dorothy exclaims, "That belonged to great Uncle Henry." I know. Look, my old friend Phyllis' boy has a costume shop. I bet he'd love to have this. I put him in a nice box and write, "I'll speak no more." So I like this. I will speak no more is like the tone. Again, it's probably going to be a pretty thematic note. So I don't want to beat a dead cousin here. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot of room to expand the story. Like, can we zoom into one of these moments and do an expansive revision and really give us a scene and not summary? Can we get out of summary and into scene? Um, so I think a lot of what we're doing is summarizing large periods of time. Like we went through an entire couple of lifetimes in 8 pages. So that's an enormous amount of summary. And it almost would do you better to go through a couple of minutes in 8 pages, and really zoom into a moment and read and highlight or look at some books that you enjoy and see how those writers are approaching scene. Are they, kind of compressing time this much? And what you might find is that most writers are not compressing time. They're expanding time and they're jumping between time. So they're saying, I'm going to jump into this moment. I'm going to expand it into a scene. And then I'm going to jump to another moment further ahead. I'm going to expand that into a scene, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind as you think about your writing, right? And to say, hey, that is, it's a practice a lot of people are doing, and it's meeting their goals. And obviously your goals as a writer are paramount, right? So what you want to accomplish is the most important thing. Um, but if you say, hey, I want to make this something that has a more broad appeal, that will be more widely read, then thinking through that will probably be pretty helpful to say, okay, um, what are some of the techniques of stories that have a broad appeal are using, and how do I integrate them into a scene, rather than expanding years into paragraphs. Can we expand seconds into pages? Yeah. Okay. It was Sunday when a knock came at the door. It was January 1986. I was watching the New England Patriots. Blast of cold air hit me. I was surprised. A very old lady holding a large box. What can I do for you? It's in the room paper cup. And yes, I do have a constant shop. I'd like to give you these. Belongs to my great uncle Henry, and you can use them at the shop. So, in some ways, I like that we're getting a different point of view, a different dialogue. So, page 9, like the new point of view and dialogue. But, this is, how the conversation probably went. But unfortunately, most normal conversations aren't too dramatically compelling. Is this something? Summarize and find a more dramatic moment in the coat's life. Okay, she sounded ice smooth, turned down my voice. I set the box on the dining room table and returned to the exciting finish of the game. The Chicago Bears won the championship. So I like this, but again, this is a champion. Like you're reporting history. This is a championship that happened years ago. We already know who won. So remember, our goal in the story is to surprise and entertain and to have suspense, right? And suspense is not knowing what is going to happen next. And the fact that a lot of these historical facts are playing out kind of exactly like you'd expect will drain some of that tension. And so it's something to be aware of and to say, okay, what are some ways to turn up the heat here, to make this more dramatic, to make it more compelling? Something well worth continuing to push on. Rest of fine beaver pelt inside the white, inside Latin, slightly worn. Figured it had to be at least 100 years old. Next, I took out a black lacquered ivory tip swagger stick with a gold tasseled braid. Striding down the cobblestone street with his top hat and fancy cane was beyond my imagining. An old white cloth. I untied its bindings. Oh my heart skipped a beat. It looked like a living animal. I grasped the sides of the government and removed it from the box. Brushed my hand over it, nuttered, ah, the coat was huge. Bigger than me. Bigger than life. Felt giddy and put it on. Nice. I like, so we're getting good description of this character's. I like, getting the description of this character's feelings. Giddy, felt a shiver, excited. Um, you know, um, consider, giving some of these emotional beats to the coat character. Yeah. It was before I stuck my hands in my pocket. I was surprised to find one pocket punch deeper than the other. It was way below zero on that cold day, but I never felt the sting of that icy cold. I walked down the end of the street and back to the house. I took off the coat and examined it. It was in pristine condition. The next day, I called someone, Historical Society, representative of the and said, he informed me this was original buffalo coat, probably made in the late phase of the great slaughter of the American bison. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. Keep it, treasure it, was all I could say. And there's the extra large coat. It's pretty cool. It looks pretty awesome. If only Toads could talk. Who was the hosting in the first round? That's awesome. Well, this is a good story. Like honestly, I think you've done a lot of hard work, and it sounds like you've invested a lot in the history of this work as well, which is something to be proud of. Overall, let's talk about the overall notes. Some of them are probably going to be a little bit repetitive here, since we already kind of talked a little bit about some of the overall themes. So overall, great work on the story. It's a fun imagining and POV stories from are a common device, and it's always worth developing this genre. The good, improve. Here we go. Oops. I'll do. All right. So the good, I think, is like grammar and structure and phrasing is clear and clean. I think it's a fun take on something I haven't learned much about. Oh man, my poor fingers are crickety cracking. I'm getting old. Let's see. It's a fun take on something I haven't learned much about. And I think I like some of the surprising moments, especially when the coat talks about its life among talks about its life in retrospective. Yeah. Okay. So the stuff to improve is a lot of the events are things described are things I'd expect. What are some ways to surprise me with information? Consider reading some stories that are. Let me find. I always recommend doing the highlighter here. Reading stories that are using objects or animals as POV and highlight their structure to see what tools they're using. Dive deeper or consider diving deeper the emotions of the story. Yes, these events happened, but the drama emerges from a character. Okay. Well, that is the revision for tonight. Two really fun stories, two great jobs by two awesome authors. So I'll give you guys a round of applause. Well done, well done. I'm excited to see your revisions, if you do make revisions, and what you all come up with. And hope you all have a great night. Take care, everybody. Bye.